Well, good. Today we're going to talk about reduction of anxiety and stress. How many of you have been to a stress management workshop in the last 5 or 10 years? Okay, well, good. Well, then feel free to join in. I'm going to try to leave some time for questions at the end, but you can ask a question at the relevant point also, and we'll try to deal with that as time permits. Today we're going to be talking about anxiety symptoms, not anxiety disorders, like PTSD and social anxiety. We're going to talk about the anxiety symptoms that go along with stress. Stress, people call stress, they mean different things by it. Some people mean the symptoms that people have. Oh, I'm feeling stressed out, and they're talking about things like muscle tension and headaches and jitteriness and stuff, and others refer to stress as in things that are stressing them. I've got so many demands on me, I've got such a tight schedule and so many people wanting me to do things for them. So we're going to use all of those terms interchangeably talking about stress. We've been studying stress a lot for several years. We know that stress has there are a variety of stress responses. There's the general response of stress that people have probably heard called the general adaptation syndrome. They've said, regardless of the person, if somebody is under a high bit of demand or they've been under stress for a long period of time, their body begins to show classic symptoms of being under stress. Their hormones, they show adrenaline in secretions and cortisol, and their heart rate and blood pressure and all this stuff start going up. There's a classic stress-looking response that we get. And along with that, there are specific stress responses that occur in all of us depending on what our family history looks like and what our history is. Some of us are GI responders, so when we get under stress for a period of time or intense stress, our intestines and stomach start acting up and we get all kinds of GI symptoms. Others of us have headaches, others get insomnia. It depends on which bodily system by family history and by your own early health history turns out to be kind of the weak system. That's the one stress seems to attack first and frequently. So those kind of things are going on. But stress is something, and change is something we all have to put up with. Now, there are different levels of stress. There's the really big stuff, like this tornado that swept through Louisiana a few days ago. Some of those people had out of the ordinary stress. Those poor folks in those motorhomes down there near New Orleans, a bunch of them were killed, others were beat up bad. Those kind of stressors you get when you're in combat, when you're under physical attack, you're in some bad weather situation like that where you come so close to being harmed that you honestly feel like you're about to die, the death imprint. That's a whole different level of stress, and that can cause a whole variety of things, and we see that a lot in our combat victims coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. That's the most intensive level. Then there's another level of stressors that tend to affect us differently. These are the major life events that happen to all of us, like divorce, like being fired from your job, like running out of money, like having someone close to you pass away. Those kinds of things, they're bad. They're not ordinary everyday stuff. They're big events. And most of us experience 2 to 3 of those a year. That's normal. Now, in a bad year, you say, well, not me. I had about 6 or 7 of those this year. Well, I'm sorry that you had really a bad year, but most years, people experience 2 or 3 of those, even in a pretty good year. So my point is, stress is a part of our life. Now, there's another part of stress that I was very interested in some of my early research, and that is the old adage I always heard in my family, it's not the dragons that get you, son, it's the gnats. And they were saying, it's not that I have a terrible life. I don't really have anything, I'm not faced with war or threat to my health, to my life every day. And, we're pretty good, we're pretty well off financially, and we're stable, and thank goodness everybody's been healthy this year. But there's another set of stressors. I mean, what about Baton Rouge traffic? Let's talk about that. All right? That's something that has happened since Katrina. That's another thing that we have to deal with. And you go, well, you're a whiny baby if that's what you got to complain about. But if you have that happening on a frequent basis, my research said, how important are those small life events that we're all going through? Driving in traffic, having to do something you're not very good at, having people ignore you. Just a variety of things. And I came up with research that looked at the health effects of those kind of events. How many of those, did people who experience a lot of those things end up getting sick more often, taking more medication, going to the doctor more often? And sure enough, it panned out that it did. And that was some of my earliest research doing that. Today, I have handed out a very quick one-page questionnaire. How many of you do not have it? 25 questions. If you don't have it, raise your hand and one can be brought to you. There's a pen in your packet if you're in the mood to quickly fill out this little questionnaire. It's just for you, not for me. But if you will go through that list of 25 items, there's 25 items, and ask yourself, did this event happen to me since last Saturday? In the last week, did this happen to me? And if it did, indicate it, put a circle around it. The other thing, if you want to go a little further, you can, if that event happened to you, you could rate the stressfulness of it, everywhere from X saying, yeah, it happened, but it was not stressful at all the way to a 7, which meant it was extremely stressful. So if you rate the ones that happened to you, not the ones that didn't happen to you, don't rate those, just the ones who happened to you. If you add up the ratings, that will give you an impact score. So go through and count the number of events that have happened to you since last Saturday and indicate which events happened to you since last Saturday. And then for the ones that happened, consider rating how stressful they were. Raise your hand if you're done. I'm just trying to stress you. How's it working? Look at whether or not the event happened since last Saturday, and if it did, just put a little check mark by it or circle it, whatever you want to do. Then if you want to go to the trouble to rate it, you can. If you rate it, then you can add up the ratings of the ones that happened to you. So if you mark event 3 and event 6, and one of them was rated a 4 and one was rated a 3, you would add up that 4 and 3 when you were doing your impact score. Here's the information on how to interpret this test. Now, this is not a highly sophisticated stress assessment. If I were doing a stress assessment for research or clinical work, I would definitely get a lot more information than this. This is just a quickie test for people taking a seminar. But it does have better data than, say, a survey in Cosmopolitan magazine. This one does have some data on it about how it may impact health and stuff. But it's just a very simple screening test. What would be more helpful is if someone did this every week across several weeks, so they could watch their stress levels fluctuate, and we would get a better indication of what their stress level's like. But anyway, if you had between 3 and 17 events marked during the past week, you are where most American adults fall in terms of number of small stressful events. If you have over 18 in the last week, then you're above average in your level of stress. You're probably more at risk for having a lot of demands in your life, a lot of day-to-day demands. If you add up your ratings and they're 0 to 49, that's kind of how much impact or stress you're feeling. Greater than 50, you're feeling the above average amount of stress compared to other people your age. Is that clear to everybody? Anybody have a question about that? So tell me, this is one indicator, but tell me, what kinds of things do you see in your friends who are having trouble with stress? When they're starting to have too much going on in their day and things are starting to get to them, what are the little telltale signs that you first pick up on that this person is really starting to get stressed out? What do you see? Irritability. What else? Shut down. They kind of are pulling back. What else? Attitude. Overeating. Or undereating. Some people, it affects people differently. You can guess which one I am, but anyway. Here's some of them. You mentioned some of these. Loss of sense of humor. People that normally like a good joke or like to cut up, they're not in the mood. They don't want to socialize. You said they pull back. Their work efficiency's bad. I mean, you don't have any time to relax and get away from things. Your ability to perform becomes poorer and poorer. Some of these sound familiar, and this can affect your sleep. Now, if these folks, your friends, this would never happen to you, but if your friends keep on doing just what they're doing, maybe they can't help it because their mom's in the hospital and they're kind of stuck right now and there's not much they can do about it. But let's just, for whatever reason, if this keeps on, what kind of things is this prolonged high level of stress typically lead to in people like us? What happens to us? We get sick. We get depressed. We start having too many cocktails. We start our anxiety disorders. Could somebody please cut off their phone? If you don't know how, get somebody to show you, please. Pet peeve? Yeah. It's a rude and a pet peeve. All right, what are they? Here's a few. These are the top list that you see that people come into like counselors for at work sites or teachers or policemen, these people that have these health offices, and this is what happens to them after they've been getting stressed. These are some of the top symptoms that happens after you are under stress for a long time. It can lead to some of these not so comfortable situations. Sometimes people have had these things before and they're just having an exacerbation because stress gives them another attack of it. Now, there are large differences in how people respond to stress. Some people like more stuff going on in their lives than others, all right? Some people are just like to have a more quiet lifestyle, and others really like more activity. In fact, there are certain people that don't do well when there's not a lot of activity. They get bored and they start worrying about things they shouldn't worry about, and they got to have a certain level of activity for them to be reasonably happy and reasonably relaxed. How many people have met folks like that? You don't have to confess anything. So much of our response to stress is determined by how sensitive we are to the feelings of stress and our choice of coping mechanisms. One of the big things that we do to control how we cope with stress, though, is how well do we manage our time. Some people don't manage their time at all. They just kind of say, oh, I'll just let things happen. Well, if you don't have much going on in your life and you got a lot of support from people like spouses and kids and associates and all, then maybe that works. Maybe that works. But for most of us, if we don't manage time, this can lead to a very stressful lifestyle. If you leave your responsibility entirely to other people, one of the problems is that your own personal needs and desires don't necessarily get top priority. You end up doing what other people want to do and not so much what your own needs and desires are. There are major errors in thinking that people have about time management. Some people think I do not have time to manage. All my time's taken. You know, I'm caring for my parent, or I'm caring for my 4 kids. Well, that's not a clever way to manage your time. You're letting a lot of opportunity get by you. What if you said, I don't have time to plan meals and stuff to cook and things to buy because I'm too busy, you know, looking after these other things? What would happen to mealtime at your house if you'd had no planning? It would get very chaotic, right? So another example is how you manage your time. If you don't manage your time, then you're going to get in trouble. If you leave the responsibility to other people, I'm too busy to manage my time. That is a surefire way to get even busier and to get more stressed out, because without managing your time, it's just going to get worse. People who tend to have more productive, less stressful lives are people who find time for time management. They set a regular time to do time management. How frequently should you do that? That kind of depends. Some people feel like they need to do it at least once a week. A lot of people say, no. I can do it once a week for an overall week thing, but I have to look at my schedule every evening before I go to bed or every morning when I get up. I keep it on my phone, or I have a calendar, a daily calendar that I keep stuff in. And if I don't put stuff in there, and if I don't live by that schedule, then I forget stuff. I end up with too much to do at once, and I get very stressed out because things don't happen. But again, others say, I don't care. If it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. If people don't get help, they don't get help. How many of us can live like that? You know, I can't. There are too many people dependent on me, and there's too many things I need to do in order to keep things running. How much time should you manage? Some people say, I just live one day at a time. Me personally, I like to handle a week at a time. And, you know, I'll put a few things on my calendar like, Women's Wellness Day is coming up in a few months. I'm going to go ahead and stick that on my calendar because I don't want to miss that event. Or, you know, I don't want to miss, we want to go to Jazz Fest this year, so I'm putting it in. Whatever it is, you know, the family reunion you're going to have in September. So you put stuff like that in there. But main thing you want to make sure is you pretty much got your next week set up and handling it. The way you manage your time is you got to figure out what it is you need to do. A lot of people don't write down what they need to do. They're agreeing to do things and they're thinking of things they need to do and all this stuff, but they don't write them down. They rely totally on their memory, and guess what? We forget a lot. Even when we're young and our brain's supposed to be working well and all this stuff, you cannot rely on your memory to remember everything. Maybe a few of us who have very special powers, but 99 and 44, 100% of us do better when we write stuff down. We do a to-do list. Cleaning out the bathroom closet. Yeah, that's something you want to get done. Taking your sick mom to her doctor's appointment. Shopping for Thanksgiving dinner because it's the week of Thanksgiving. Taking the kids to see a movie you promised. You promised you'd take them to see Star Wars, and it's about to go out of town, so you've got to get it on your list and get it scheduled. You want to go out with your spouse and some friends to dinner. You think that's a good thing. You haven't had a night out socializing with your friends and your spouse. Going for a walk to unwind and exercise. You say, well, that's trivial. Why would I put that on my list? That's not worth putting on my list. Guess what? If it doesn't go on the list, it's not likely to get done. Oh, yeah, I'll remember. It's like, oh, really? You'll remember at 9 o'clock at night, and you'll go, I don't feel like it now. Attending Women's Day, Wellness Day. After you get your long list of things to do, the next step in time management is to set priorities. You know, you've got a list, a B list, and a C list. You begin to move that list of things to do into what are the most important things that I really need to do. Well, mom's doctor's appointment, she's sick, and I have an appointment scheduled, so I got to make that happen. I'm putting that in the important list. And the dog has yacked on the rug 5 times in the last 3 days. That dog's going to the vet. I'm not cleaning up any more, sick dog. B list. These are things that are important, but they're not absolutely crucial, but they're pretty important. They're things you really want to do. You really do want to take the kids to the movie you promised you would take them to. You don't like breaking promises to your kids. Dinner with your spouse and friends, you feel like this doesn't happen enough. It needs to be something that if I don't schedule it, 2 or 3 weeks will go by and I'll go, I meant to do that. I've been so busy. How many times you say that? It's like, it's not so much that, it's like you haven't really made it happen. Shopping for Thanksgiving and women's wellness. I don't know why this thing's going so nuts. Here are things that might go in the can't wait column. Cleaning out closet. And look here, going for a walk to unwind and get exercise. How did that end up in this column? What's going to happen if it ends up in this column? It's not going to happen very often, is it? Be nice if we could move it into the B column. That would be a nice thing to have in the B column since it's your health. And unwinding and exercising, what's that going to do to your ability to manage stress? It's going to help you. But when people get busy, what's the first thing that gets put in the C column? Exercise. So, see, you're saying, no. If I let this stuff go on autopilot, a lot of bad stuff's going to happen. So once you've got things set into your priorities, the next step is to get it programmed in. So Monday morning, what are our important events? We got to get mom to a doctor's appointment at 2 o'clock, and the vet will see the puppy at 9 o'clock. So those go in. Then we start looking at some of the B-level events. One thing I'm going to show you, though, a lot of things that end up in the most important column are things who have a deadline on them and we have waited to the last minute. If that's happening a lot, and a lot of things are in the most important column for the week because there's no time left or you're not going to get to do it. If I don't register for this, I'm not going to get to go. If I don't, if I don't take these sheets and pillowcases and stuff in, I'm not going to get the deal at Keen's. It's going to be gone. If there are things like that, don't wait to the last minute. If you've got a lot of those in this A list, they don't belong in the A list, do they? They belong in the C list. But they become A list because you've let the deadline run out. So try to schedule them earlier so you don't end up with those kind of things in that list. So you put all the stuff in, and you schedule your week. You really use this. These are important tools. You go, hey, what are you talking about? I'm not running a train station here. I don't need all this stuff. But it's like, yes, you do. You really want to have a well-run life that all of a sudden you go, man, I got more time than I realized. You know, this stuff starts fitting in. Now, there's other things you have to do too. You have to stay on schedule, and sometimes things happen, and you have to redo the schedule. So you have to reschedule tasks and events when something very important comes up. Somebody gets sick. You know, you have a fender bender in your car when you're taking the puppy to the vet. Things have to be moved around, okay? I'm not saying that everything's written in stone, but you don't just ignore and not try to run by a schedule. The other thing you have to do is say, you know, there's a lot on this to-do list. Before I schedule everything, I'm going to ask myself, do I really need to take this dog to the vet, or can my oldest son do that? Why don't I do what all good managers do and delegate this stuff, some of this stuff? Well, I didn't even think about that. Well, I'm the only one that can do it, or nobody ever does it like I like it. It's like, get over that stuff. You know, cut that out. You know, we're talking about taking a dog to a vet, not, you know, launching a nuclear missile. You know, delegate some of that stuff. It's good for everybody to be a part of the family anyway. And what's the last thing on this list? Learn to say no. I think you should get with somebody you really respect, who you think speaks well to other people, and tell this person, I would like you to help me think of 8 ways to tell somebody no. Somebody give us a good example. What's a good way to tell somebody, no, I'm not going to be able to accept that? Come on. I'm sorry, but my schedule won't allow it. I'm all booked up. I would like to, maybe another time. Somebody give me another one. All right. You're being invited to attend a committee meeting at the church to plan for this visiting preacher. And it's just nothing, you can't add that to your schedule. How do you get out of it? I'm delighted you asked me to do that. Normally I would love doing this. But, you know, there might be a real reason. I mean, it really might be a reason. You know, I've already agreed. I already have another engagement. I've already agreed to do something for someone else. You don't have to give all the details. It's best if you don't have to lie. People do lie. And they do it all the time. But, you know, it's not fun for a bunch of us. We don't like it. You know, it's better to just say, my week is absolutely filled. And rather than do a bad job, I'm going to wait and maybe do this another time, if that's okay. And stick by it. But again, learn to say no. It's very important. It's nothing wrong with saying no to anyone on occasion. It makes them respect that your time is important. I mean, you don't want people thinking, oh, let's ask her. She never has anything to do. Oh, she'll do it. She'll do it. She doesn't have anything to do. It's like, you know, learn. It helps your relationship with people every now and then to say, well, I'd love to do that, but, you know, I've already got something planned, and I'm going to have to take a rain check. Thank you very much, though. You don't have to tell them, my rain check is I'm going to the gym. It's in my calendar, and I'm not going to miss it that night. And you say, I'm not saying that you don't do things that are very important with you. Maybe you would change your schedule. That you don't say, oh, it's already in the calendar, I can't change it. Yes, you can. But I'm just saying you need to say no to some things. You shouldn't have a week that's too full. You need to kind of figure out what's comfortable level of stuff for you. And you know what? Life's too short and you're too old to work harder than you enjoy working. Okay? And let me tell you, if you don't take control over your time, it'll happen. It'll happen. And, you know, not because people are bad, but, you know, what's the old thing? No good deed gets unpunished. I mean, people come back to you. Somebody have a question? Yeah, and if you don't like being people confronting you and getting in your face, you go, let me check on that and get back to you. I'll email you, or I'll call you later. Okay, so there's time management. Now, let's talk about another important thing about stress management. You got to manage your time, and the better you get at it, the better time management you'll get. You can get very good at it, and there's some good self-help books at Barnes & Noble and other places that'll walk you through this stuff. So there are things you can do that make you better at this. But, I mean, people go to business school to learn how to run businesses, and this is a lot of what they're learning, isn't it? How to manage. You've got to manage your life. And if you manage your life, you'll have a happier, better life. It'll be more fulfilling to you. Now, there's another part besides time management. It's like what our brains do with the stressful information or the change stuff coming in. Our brains, we're human beings. We're not just logical computers. So our past experience and the people who raised us, our parents, our school teachers, our relatives, some of our older friends, husbands, wives, they affected how we think. And some of us have very regular ways of thinking about things. Now, all of us, let me just talk about this. For instance, there are those among us who their brain, when anything happens, or any new information comes in, particularly something they got to do different, their brain immediately goes to assuming the worst case scenario. It starts finding the most awful way this new change is going to affect them and everybody around them. This style begins to blow things out of proportion. It gets reinforced because, you know, they're preparing for the worst. They're saying, look, don't get mad at me. This is just the way my mind works. When you tell me that we're going to do things differently at prayer meeting and change the whole sequence of it, then I've got to think about how that is going to create problems. And I got to go through every one of those problems. You know, and that's just the way I do things. You know, and I got to assume the worst case scenario. Well, that is one way of doing things, but what happens while you are going through that worst case scenario, thinking of all these bad things can happen, all these people who are going to be, you know, angry and upset and how it's going to disrupt everything and all. What's happening to those stress hormones in your body? They're living that. It might as well be happening. You know, you're releasing epinephrine and cortisol, and your breathing's getting faster, and your heart rate's climbing, and your blood pressure's climbing, all this, because you're going through this thing. You're living it. You're stressing yourself. Your body is getting ready to handle this terrible catastrophe that you are generating in your head. This leads to anxiety, depressed mood, and fatigue, and while you're doing all this, you're probably going to be voicing how bad this is going to be. So what do people think about people who use this style of dealing with stress 95% of the time? They say, she is so negative. My Lord, have mercy. You know, we were just talking about tweaking the way we were doing prayer meeting, and this person makes it sound like the Titanic is going down. You know? And they go, I hate dealing with this person. Does she have to be on the committee? It's terrible. Nothing would ever change if she were on any committee, because no matter what we suggest, it's terrible, it's catastrophic, on and on. So that way of handling your problems. I'm not saying that I don't do that sometimes and all of us don't do that sometimes. Catastrophic thinking is a type of thinking that all of us engage in. But if you do it 95% of the time, you overuse it. You overuse it. You're most likely to think about this when you're kind of stressed out anyway, though. You know, you tend to do these bad habits when you really hadn't been sleeping well and you're irritated at your spouse and you're worried about your kid and all like that. So that when this comes in, this is when you flip this tape and engage in this catastrophic thinking. Let's take another one. Denial of change. The flip side of that, a lot of people, their philosophy is that, hey, just ignore it and it'll go away. You know, I don't like this new change they're talking about for prayer meeting. I'm just not going to play. I'm just going to pretend like it's not happening. I'm just going to go about my business as if nothing happened. I'm not going to change the way I'm doing it. I'm not going to be there at a different time. I'm just going to do it the way I want. I'm just going to deny that the change is occurring. Well, this gets rewarded a lot too, by the way. You know, after 1 or 2 nights, a lot of times when people do try a new change at a meeting, they go, you know, this isn't working out any better than the other way. Let's just go back to do it like we did. You know. But guess what? Change and stress doesn't always go away on its own, does it? Your husband's coming to you saying, look, baby, this is really starting to get on my nerves. You're making me feel like I'm unloved, like my opinion doesn't count. When you do this, it's hurting me. This is not something you should deny. This is not a good strategy to deal with this stressor. Denying things tends to not solve problems. It tends to make people sick because they worry about it. They don't sleep. They don't deal with things. So using denial 95% of the time, if you're doing that, you're having a lot of headaches. You're having a lot of insomnia. You're having a lot of heart palpitations and things like that, because this is not a way to handle stress. Is it wrong to use it sometimes? Heck yeah. With some of your kids, they come in and tell you all this stuff and you go, just wait a minute. This will be totally different in 2 hours. Let's just ignore this. Let's deal with this stress by denial. And sure enough, she goes, we worked it out, Mom, never mind. So there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not something you ought to use 90% of the time. Another important thing, and I don't want to run over time here, so one other thing I want to mention besides time management, being careful about how you think about change when you have to deal with it. Last but not least, seeking social support. Human beings are not made to be alone. Now, some people prefer more alone time than others, but human beings are social animals. A few people have a mental disorder that makes them really, really not comfortable with people at all, but that's a very rare thing. Most of us need a certain level of social support. We need somebody to help us deal with stress. What we need is finding the person who will give us appropriate and useful social support. Very few of us really want somebody to come in and say, oh, that's easy, this is how you ought to fix it. You know, that's not a very helpful, supportive thing. Most of us prefer a friend who comes in and goes, baby doll, I've seen you handle a lot of tough things. And I know this one's tough too, but you know, I have a lot of confidence in you watching you handle stuff like this in the past. So, you know, I want you to hunker down, take care of yourself, make sure you're sleeping and doing the right things, and you'll handle this. Somebody who will have confidence in you, who will remind you of your past successes. Yeah, if you ask them, well, what do you think about so-and-so, they'll tell you. But someone who is a good social support. So it's important to figure out who the right person is. It may not be your spouse. It may be a friend at work. It may be your sister. I don't know. You've got to find a person who knows how to be supportive. You may need more than one if you've got a long-standing stressor you're dealing with. You're dealing with a long-standing disease. You might wear one person out. You may need 2 or 3. Knowing how to pick the right person, pick the right time, and being willing to tell them exactly what you need. Don't make them guess. Train them up. And last but not least, you try your best, you get advice, you do self-help books, you might even seek counseling, you ask your best friends, you try the techniques, but sometimes people in situations just ask too much. Your job site has changed too much. It's not right anymore. Your marriage is no longer anywhere close to where it was. It is not fixable at a certain point. What does Kenny Rogers say? This is nothing you do quickly, but it is not smart and wise to say, oh, you never leave a bad situation no matter what. There are times where you have to change a bad situation. Now, that doesn't mean totally physically leaving. Sometimes it means totally physically changing the way you handle it, where it is so different that you're basically out of it. Any other quick comments or questions? I don't want to hold you over. Thank you so much for your participation.